So, welcome. My name's Nathan Rader with Deutsche Telekom, and I'm here to talk about the CAMARA API alliance that we've started with a bunch of other operators, vendors, and users to expose APIs, and I want to just talk through that a little bit. So, the first thing is what is a network capability? What are we trying to expose? What are we trying to make available? So as the kind of we move to 5G, we sort of see the opportunity here to offer more from our network than just connectivity. And as we look at different things, we see, okay, some of the things we can do, like location. We can create an API that allows developers to have location of the network. Now, that's an interesting API because it's both very good. For instance, in this example, what happens if a drone crashes? You can get the last location of where that was. But also it could become a stalker API, so we don't want that to happen either. So we have to take and look at these use cases and figure out how do we offer APIs that are available and how they can be used in the right way, whether that to meet privacy, data regulatory, thank you. Also the net neutrality rules when it comes to other APIs. So another example here that we've been looking at is traffic jam warnings, corona warnings. How many UEs are in a single sector? Could we offer that to developers? Could they take those APIs? Could they turn that into something interesting? Or number of UEs in a slice as we start offering network slicing. That way we can look at network congestion, we can adapt video transmission rates, things like that. But then also moving on to sort of less about information and more onto control of the network. So could we offer a quality on demand? Could we give users a better service and give them an API to ask for that? Could we give them APIs for low energy IoT type devices, smart meters and things like that, where you check it once a month? Can you trigger a call that basically says, please wake up, it's time to start transmitting? Or could we block UEs in certain geographic locations if we don't want users to have those? Those are the kind of things we're thinking about. Now, as we think about that, the challenge we've run into is that developers don't understand them. And how do we get developers to use it? Now, the problem is that nowhere have we ever given control and information out of the network in most cases. If you think back to dial-up, you got some crazy noises to know if it was working. Wi-Fi, it's either up or it's down, and the best thing is go in and restart your router. And on the network, same thing. How many bars do you have? And that's it. That's about the most information you can get out of your network, and you pretty much have zero control. So what has happened is developers have taken and built all of the over-the-top type of activities on top, and with that, they've just ignored what comes from the network, and they've looked and said, okay, we're just going to use that connectivity and we're going to drive it that way. But once we sit and talk to developers, and it does take us quite a while to kind of educate them on what this could be, what they could do, explore some of the use cases with them, we get a lot of interesting comments that come out from the developers. And one of them is that, wow, that's super valuable. Your guys are sitting on a gold mine here as telcos. We want to use some of these things. Now, the challenge we have is that this is not something that we can do alone, Deutsche Telekom. We need to get others on board. So how do we do that? And that's where we started saying, okay, well, we need to build an ecosystem for the community, and we launched this concept of the CAMARA Alliance. And the main reasons for it was make these APIs available, abstract them away, create that agility, and kind of focus on how those can be used in business cases and driven forward. So if we dive into each one of those individually, availability. So all of these APIs need to actually come from our network. So you can't go and get a location from somebody else's network for our UEs because they're not in that network. And of course, very few developers have the idea that they want to go and build an application for a single network in a single country. Everybody's got their dreams of being this, global unicorn, and therefore you need that reach. So how do we make sure that these APIs are available? And that's kind of where we were looking at this with CAMARA. is to say, okay, can we work together as operators? Can we have these APIs available in multiple countries, on multiple networks, so that developers can actually start using those APIs, and we as operators can benefit from that, because our customers too are going to want to roam. They're going to want to go into other countries, if a developer, wants to build an app for some sort of gaming. My kids want to play with their friends, and their friends are a lot of times on a different network than, my kids are. So we needed to sort that, and that's one of the things that CAMARA is looking to address. The second thing is abstraction. How do we abstract away the complexities of a telco network? There are a lot of APIs that exist in a telco network today. A lot of them are standardized in things like 3GPP and other places. But as we looked at those APIs, we said, okay, can the average person actually get the parameters to fill into that API? And the answer was a clear no, because it's something that we don't publish as an operator. So things like the cell ID. We use that all the time internally as a telco, but the average user is never going to know what their cell ID is, and there's not a database or somewhere they can look up for it. So we need to hide it. So the goal is how do we make this simple for developers to use? How do we make it so they can use it on different networks? And that's where we came about with this idea with CAMARA to do the abstraction and go to more of an intent-based set of APIs. So the goal is that the developer can come in and just say, I want a better quality of service, and I'm this user, please give it to me, and that's it. That's all they have to ask for. Then within the network, we actually sit there and we go find the complexities. We go in and say, okay, where is that user located? What's its cell ID? And assemble essentially all the parameters are needed to create this request for just please give me better quality of service. And that's going to be different on a lot of different operator networks, but from the developer point of view, they can call the singular CAMARA API to get that better quality of service no matter which network they're on, as long as these are implemented there. So that's what we've been trying to solve on that, is make those an easy to use set of APIs where you ask for an intent or a service, and less so from just a raw API call to the network. The other thing when it came to abstraction we had to think about is, how can these APIs be offered? And as we look at these APIs, there's going to be the need for developers to actually get a hold of them. And again, if you look at the first example, you could have a developer there on the right that's going to take the API. They can go to one network, ask for the API, make the call, fantastic, it works. But there's going to be very few people that are probably in that scenario, because that is the one network in one country approach. So the other option is to go to B, kind of more of an API roaming type of a thing. You make the call to your network, but then you pass it off with a roaming call to a neighbor network. Now, of course, that requires all of us operators to get together and define and figure out what API roaming looks like. And of course, that's a task that we see that's going to have to be taken on to make that work. The other option we have is that in option C, the developer themselves does all of the kind of abstraction and federation. They go off to each network that they want to operate in and form some sort of agreement for those APIs. Now, that puts a lot of onus on the developers, which means that probably only the largest of companies will actually take on this effort and this journey to do those kind of discussions, which then ultimately takes us back to the final option, where there's some sort of aggregator in between us and the developers. Now, that aggregator could be a single telco. That aggregator could be one of the major hyperscalers. That aggregator could also be one of the existing vendors that are already doing this type of abstraction. Things like some of these CPaaS providers that are already doing that for two-factor authentication, SMSs, those type of things. So we see that this is a place where that is evolving, but is definitely something that's going to have to be needed to make this work. Again, the goal is, how do we make all of the telcos work together to offer the same services everywhere? Now, the other thing is agility. Now, when we were looking at how we think about launching CAMARA, we had two very different sets of operators there. There were some operators that said, hey, this is important, we want to get out there, we want to be fast, working code is better than, perfect code at the end, so we want to get out there. But then there was another group of operators that said, nope, we don't do anything in our network until it's fully standardized and double-checked, triple-checked, quadruple-checked kind of a thing. And so we said, well, how do we actually solve this problem? How do we make these APIs available and meet the needs of all of the operators? So we spent a lot of time talking in the community, and we came up with a sort of an interesting approach where we jointly launched CAMARA between two groups, the Linux Foundation and the GSMA. And the principle of that was that within the Linux Foundation, we can do everything in open source, we can define the APIs, telcos that want to be quick, developers who want to be quick, they can all get into the the Git repo, they can start building, they can implement it, and they can deploy it in their network as soon as they've decided that it's up, running, and working. But then for operators that still want to be a little slower, be more cautious, the GSMA is intending to take the approved sets of APIs and then publish those out to their community so that once they're kind of standard tested with a few networks and proven that they're working, then you can actually directly get to those APIs that are listed in the GSMA, and the slower operators can take that opportunity to implement in that manner. So that's how we sort of worked through this to meet both parties. So then we get to the scope of what the actual project is trying to accomplish. And so as we looked at scope, we didn't want to kind of boil the ocean. We didn't want to put everything into this project and do it in the typical telco way. Because in my view, the typical telco way is we throw everything at it, and we're going to have so much stuff in there that it never gets finished, and ultimately fails. And I still give this a 50-50 chance of being successful, to be honest, because there's a lot of operators, there's a lot of developers you have to get on board, but at least we wanted to give ourselves a better odds, than trying to build some sort of castle. So we limited the scope to one very small thing, focusing on the northbound sets of APIs between the actual developer application and the exposure part of the network. So making that standardized there, ignoring everything down on the southbound side, ignoring everything on the east-westbound side for the time being, and only focus on defining those abstracted, simple APIs towards the developer, and that's it. And everything else that keeps trying to be thrown in, we sort of say, no, we're going to stop that, because things like the southbound APIs, every network is different. Everyone has a combination of different vendors, and those different vendors are going to need to sort that out themselves. And so trying to put that into some sort of standards is never going to work. Now, continuing on the scope, there are a few other things that we wanted to focus on. So it's not just about that northbound APIs. We needed to have sort of a set of commonalities. How do we ensure that these APIs actually look and feel the same across all of the APIs? Because what will happen is that if you have lots of different operators, each throwing an API in that they've built, they're all going to be built in different ways. They're all going to have different authentication methods. They're all going to have different kind of ways that documentation is written. So we actually wanted to spend the time and focus on what are the requirements, how do we define these sets of APIs so that they kind of have the same look and feel. So when you get a CAMARA API, it looks and feels like a CAMARA API. And so that's where we're kind of putting some focus there on code, documentation, and things like that. Now, as we go forward with it, it actually is real. At this point in time, the CAMARA project has about 11 API families, and we're building these in families because as you look at a family, there are going to be several APIs that are there. So if we're talking about something like a quality on demand, hey, please give me a better quality. As soon as you have somebody who's paying for that quality, the next thing they're going to want to know is, am I getting what I'm paid for? Can I have an API that gives me analytics and the status that I'm actually getting a better quality? So those fall underneath this sort of family of APIs. We have about three different kind of working groups, one kind of on the whole sets of APIs, another focusing on commonality, and then another one on governance. In general, there's about 250-ish people that are participating at any given time, and we have about 50 different companies that are active working on this. Kind of an example of some of the folks, so it's quite a mix. Everywhere from telco operators themselves, large hyperscalers, systems integrators, CPaaS providers, network function vendors, even end users are already in here, because that's really where we're looking to have is that, again, thinking about how APIs are needing to be successful, we as a telco can't go off and just define an API and say, this is your API, this is what you have to use, you know. Nobody's going to use it, because we've already done this at Deutsche Telekom. We've defined some APIs, we've put them out there to test, and we've been running what we call some 5G early access programs. And as we've been running these, they've been very interesting for us, because once people see the API, quality on demand, they can take that API, they can test it, but then what they do is they say, oh, this is fantastic, but it's not exactly what I want. What I really could use is this, and that's where we actually are getting the most information, is all of the developers who actually are in there saying, this is what I want, because to us as an operator, that's more important. We would rather build something the developer's asking for than something we think a developer will actually use. And so having those folks active in the community and helping define, you know, as end users of these APIs is very important for us. So, I don't know how long I've been speaking, but this is a little bit about the CAMARA project. You can find out more on the website, so camaraproject.org. It's all open and available in GitHub for you guys to take a look, contribute. There's no cost, there's no nothing. It's just, you know, get in there and see what you can do. So with that being said, that's what I've got. So having not seen my slides until now, we'll see what I can do. But I don't know how much time. I think I have like maybe 8 minutes to do any questions if anybody has them. Yep.
The project very much. So my question is, I know that you follow the open user architecture. They also talk about APIs.
Yep.
So have you been able to kind of rationalize where one ends and where
Yep.
the other one begins?
Yeah, so we've had quite a bit of discussion with various other SDOs as part of this, and so we have, I think in the list, you maybe even saw 5G Future Forum that's defining some APIs. They've decided they're going to take and put their APIs towards the customer in there. We've had several conversations now with TM Forum, and we've kind of had the discussion, and they've said, look, as long as we're focusing on that northbound API towards the developer, that's not something that TM Forum is working on. They're worried more about that southbound. How does it look towards the network? How does it look east-westbound potentially between networks? So we've kind of got an agreement there that they play in their sandbox, we play in our sandbox, and everybody's happy. So right now, yeah, we don't see at least any overlap with any other forum, and we've talked to most of them, I think, up until this point in time. You had a question?
Yeah, I was curious about your lessons you've learned from your multi-day work with other operators. What
Yep.
can I talk to you about APIs? And second follow-up question is, clearly this is a more technical forum, but any thoughts on how the business model might work?
Yeah, clearly this is a technical forum, and we have to do that because, of course, we can't get with a bunch of operators in a group and talk about, you know, what business we're chasing. We, at least at DT, have thought quite a bit about the business case. We see that in a lot of cases it's probably going to be a B2B or B to D or X type of an opportunity. Probably a little less so than directly, you know, B2C. You know, these APIs really, we don't see that as a play. Because even though an end consumer may pay for it, I mean, you can imagine mobile gaming app where there's a little, swipe inside that says, hey, give me for the next hour I want to have, better quality or lower latency, and they go off and play a game. We expect that would be sold via somebody kind of in between, some sort of business, probably the game developer, things like that. So that's kind of where we've seen. We've been talking to quite a few of our B2B customers. At Mobile World Congress earlier this year, we did do a demo with BMW on the topic using a set of APIs where they were doing an automated valet parking kind of an effort. So they would actually take the car, and when you pulled up to a designated parking spot, you could then take your phone app out, tell the car to go park. The car would then ask the network for better quality, use that while it maneuvers by itself into a parking position, and then release the resources. So those kind of use cases was where we're actually looking to probably monetize, because that's something that people are already trained to pay for. You're trained to pay for parking. So if that's just a small extra fee included into that, by the parking garage or whoever, it's not a big deal. So your other question on learnings from past API projects and things like that. I think there's a lot of learnings that we've taken. I think you could pretty much go to just about every telco around the globe and go to developer.telco.com or api.telco.com, and you'll find either a half-baked API portal or an old one from a previous attempt. At DT, we've got about 10 of them. So this is not new. This is not our first time. But we are taking a different approach. So like I said, we're starting by saying we're not going to go off and build 100 APIs. We're going to build 3 or 4, show developers what that could look like, and then ask, what do you really want? So we actually have APIs that people are willing to pay for, less so than just, here's 100 APIs that have been standardized, go do something with it. So that's kind of one lesson learned. Timing, I think, is another. So as we think about the market, 10 years ago, people paying for an API to do something probably wasn't as common. Now it's a lot more common. So I think the industry has evolved and moved on and gives us the opportunity to explore that. When it comes to Mobile Edge X specifically, that was a very different business model. And in this case, we're not touching the business model type of side of things. We're very much only focusing on the definition of APIs and leaving the business model to each and every operator, And we already see, as we talk to some of the other, our other operator partners, they have a different go-to-market type of role where, Deutsche Telekom maybe is looking and saying, hey, we want to go and be the direct sales channel to a B2B customer. There's others that are saying, hey, I'm going to just throw everything into Amazon Marketplace or Azure Marketplace, and the developers can just buy it from there, and I'm never going to talk or touch the customer. So, there's different models. So, yeah. Yep.
The question is, I know it's very important to focus on northbound APIs.
Yep.
Do you think it's also important for seamless translation to feed that back into the forums like TGP, where that is also evolving currently, and there are limitations found in some of the groups? How do you do that?
Yeah, it could be. It's not something we're thinking about focusing on really. I think over time, I would hope that, the APIs are thought more about their usability. I mean, let's be honest, I don't think telcos yet are super good at defining APIs. So that's why we have sort of the APIs in 3GPP that exist as they do today. I think that, yeah, they will be refined over time. I don't know if necessarily CAMARA's goal is to actually do that. But I would guess that at some point in time, the two worlds will start coming together where, at least from the DT point of view, our people working on CAMARA may be asked to help the folks in in the GSM or 3GPP standards section, say, hey, can you help us write this? And eventually they will converge, but it's not a stated goal yet at this point.
You have mentioned 11 API companies. Can you list some of those? I understand you're not all by heart.
Let's see. I think they're here. So quality on demand, carrier billing, home device prioritization, device identifier, anonymized subscriber identifier, edge cloud, number verification, SMS two-factor, number verification. I don't remember exactly which one was. A SIM swap, device status, and device location are the current ones. Yeah, so the edge cloud API that's being focused on is predominantly around edge cloud discovery. So where is the closest edge cloud? So that's a difficult thing because again, most developers or people who want to consume edge cloud, they don't actually know, because we all know how a network's designed. It has to go to wherever the user plane function is, and that could be in a completely different location. And so this helps them find the actual closest one, not necessarily geographically, but actually latency and based on the network design. So that's the purpose of that. I think I'm probably out of time, or maybe I have time for one last question. No. All right. Oh, all right. So we have been on the edge discovery. So we have talked about Etsy, or we've talked with Mac. They haven't been contributing too much. I know that 5G Future Forum had been coordinating a little bit with them. So in this API family, the bulk of it is coming from 5GFF. So I would have to defer to some of the folks that are actually working there. It's not one that my team is actively involved in, sorry. So, all right. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it.